Some stories may not be suitable for younger audience. Watch this video at your own risk. And don't forget to subscribe. Thank you. The night sky above northern Ukraine was supposed to be quiet. Just another cold shift for men working inside one of the Soviet Union's proudest achievements, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. But in the early hours of April 26, 1986, the ground shook like artillery fire had struck from beneath the earth. Reactor number 4 didn't just fail, it tore itself apart. I wasn't a scientist or an engineer. I was a soldier stationed just outside Pripyat with my unit, tasked with guarding supply routes and responding to emergencies. Most of the time it was dull work, patrolling roads, checking trucks, drinking bad tea to stay awake. That night, though, the air changed. At first it was the sound. A low rumble rolled across the fields, followed by a thunderclap that didn't echo like normal thunder. It was sharp, metallic, wrong. A flash lit the horizon, and for a second we thought it was lightning. But lightning doesn't rise from the ground and hang in the sky. Our sergeant barked at us to gear up. Radios hissed with broken chatter. Nobody had answers, only orders. Move toward the plant. Secure the perimeter. Keep civilians back. I remember the faces of my squad mates as we loaded into the truck, eyes wide, jaws tight. We had trained for chemical spills, fires, even riots. Nobody had trained for whatever this was. As we got closer, the smell hit first. It wasn't smoke like from burning wood or fuel. It was bitter, metallic, almost sweet in a sickening way. The air felt heavy, pressing on the lungs. When the truck stopped, we climbed down into chaos. Fire crews were already spraying water toward the plant, though the flames were strange, bluish, and shifting like gas. Sparks rained down with the wind, carried far beyond the building. Civilians had gathered on rooftops in Pripyat, watching as if it were fireworks. None of them knew they were staring death in the face. The plant itself looked wounded. Reactor 4's roof was gone, pieces scattered across the yard. A column of light seemed to pulse upward, like something alive trying to escape. Every instinct in me screamed to turn back, but orders were orders. We moved closer, rifles slung, hands shaking. One of the firemen stumbled near us, coughing hard, his face already red and blistered as if he'd stood too long in the sun. He tried to speak, but his words slurred. They carried him away, and I swear his eyes were full of confusion, like even he didn't know what was happening to him. Our squad spread out, setting up barriers, keeping curious workers from rushing in. The closer I got to the rubble, the stranger it felt. My skin prickled, my mouth tasted of copper. When I looked at the reactor, my vision swam. For a moment, I thought I saw figures in the smoke, shapes moving where no man could stand. I blinked and they were gone. A comrade beside me whispered, "Do you see that?" He pointed at the shadows flickering inside the glow. I nodded but didn't answer. Admitting it out loud felt dangerous, as if naming it would make it real. Hours passed like minutes. More trucks arrived, engineers, scientists, soldiers. No one could agree on what to do. Some shouted that the reactor had exploded, others swore it was just a fire. Meanwhile, strange glowing dust fell from the sky like ash, coating our uniforms and hair. We brushed it off without thinking. Later, we would learn it wasn't ash at all. By dawn, the city of Pripyat still stood quiet, its people unaware of the invisible storm spreading through their homes. From our position, we could see the Ferris wheel in the amusement park, still waiting for the grand opening that would never come. Children were already awake, pointing at the rising smoke. Mothers held babies on balconies, smiling at what they thought was just another Soviet fire being handled by strong men. But I knew better. All of us who stood at that fence line knew better. Something had been unleashed that couldn't be fought with rifles or fire hoses. Something that no soldier could prepare for. And as the sun rose over the exclusion zone that didn't yet have a name, we realized our war wasn't with men or armies anymore. It was with the very air, the very ground beneath us, and worse, with the shadows that had started moving in the smoke. That was the beginning. What came next would take us deeper into a place no soldier ever wanted to go. We stayed on the fence line until the sun pulled the gray out of the sky and turned it into a pale blue that looked sick. Smoke drifted sideways, low to the ground, like it did not want to rise. The plant still hissed and crackled. Every now and then a new sound cut through the morning, a sharp clatter like metal sheets falling. None of us spoke much. We were saving our breath. The air stung like ozone and metal shavings on the tongue. Orders reached us by radio. Hold the perimeter, keep civilians out, guide the fire crews. After that, all they had left was one word: wait. Our sergeant repeated it as if that would make it true. He walked past us with his clipboard and a cigarette that burned faster than usual. He told us to keep our masks on and to drink water. I did both and still felt a slow heat crawl under my skin. By mid-morning, a bus arrived with men in white coats. They wore light cloth overboots that looked like they belonged in a clean lab, not a field of smoking debris. One of them carried a box with thin rods and a small screen that clicked. He waved the rod around like a divining stick. It clicked more near the ground, then faster near a black shard that glinted in the dust. He picked it up with tongs and dropped it into a metal bucket. When he turned, I saw his eyes. He tried to look calm. He did not make it all the way there. Behind them came a truck with canvas sides. We were told to form two lines. Two medics walked down the rows and checked our necks and hands. They gave us little white tablets and told us to swallow them with water. One of the medics saw the way I was looking at the pill and said, in a voice he wanted to sound casual, that it was good for the thyroid. I nodded and took it. It stuck in the throat for a second, then went down. Everything had to look controlled. That was the rule. When the first officer from Moscow arrived, his polished boots sank into the gray mud, and he frowned at the mess. He told the sergeant to move the civilians back another 2 blocks. He told the white coats to keep their instruments low. He told us to keep our rifles visible. A few people from the city had walked closer to see what all the noise was. The officer put on a public smile and told them the situation was under control. He said there had been a fire and that it was contained. He said they should return to their homes and await instructions. A woman asked if their children could go to school. He said yes. I watched the faces in the small crowd. They were worried but not afraid, not yet. It is hard to fear what you cannot see. They trusted uniforms. They trusted signs. They trusted the big machines and the men who ran them. They had no reason not to. My stomach turned when I saw a boy lick his fingers after eating a piece of bread. Gray dust stuck to his skin. I wanted to take the bread from him and throw it away. I did not. I told his mother to keep the children inside. She nodded like I had told her to bring an umbrella. We moved deeper toward the administrative buildings to set up a working post. The air got hotter in a way that did not fit the spring morning. It came in pulsing layers, like walking past the open door of a boiler room. The closer we were to the broken reactor, the more the dosimeter needles jumped. A man from the plant told me the needles could not jump that high because the models we had were not rated for numbers this large. He said the needles were only trying to tell us they had run out of road. I never liked paperwork, but that morning I wrote everything down in a small green notebook I kept in my chest pocket. Time, location, who I spoke to, who passed our position, what they were carrying. It was a habit that had kept me out of trouble before. It also gave my hands something to do when I did not want to think. In the notebook, I wrote a line that still bothers me. I wrote that the smoke looked blue. Later, I would ask myself why I chose that word, as if the color was the important part. By noon, the first helicopters thumped over us, low and heavy. The pilots leaned forward in their seats and looked at the broken square of the reactor hall. Bags hung from the bellies of the machines. Sand, boron, lead. The orders were to smother the fire and choke the radiation. Some drops hit the mark. Some burst on the roof of a different building. The blast had scattered black pieces of something across the yard. We were told not to touch them. Some of the fire crews had already picked them up by mistake. They were black and smooth like river stones. Graphite. The Corps had thrown its bones at us. During a lull, I was sent with 2 others to a checkpoint where a bus had stalled. The driver said it had been fine in the morning, but now it would not turn over. He kept looking at the plant in his side mirror. The passengers sat inside with the windows cracked. They were quiet. You could tell they did not know if they should get out. We pushed the bus to the side and waved a replacement vehicle forward. As the first bus door folded open, I noticed a pattern on the driver's cheek. It looked like a sunburn, tiny squares in a grid, the shape of the windshield defroster. I gave him a canteen. He drank and said he was fine. but his hands shook. Back at our post, a field kitchen head appeared, as if from nowhere. It was an old trick. Feed the troops and they will think you have a plan. Steam rose from a big pot. A cook with forearms like logs ladled soup into cups and told us to eat. The soup tasted of dill and something sour. I remember thinking it was the best soup I had tasted in weeks, but that could have been the hunger. While I ate, a friend from my squad told a joke about a pig who refuses to become sausage because it wants to be an officer. It was a bad joke. We laughed anyway. Laughter made the smoke move for a second. After lunch, we were ordered to sweep the residential blocks east of the plant. The plan was to knock on doors and tell people to stay inside and keep windows closed. We were to be calm and polite. We were not to shout the word radiation. We were given a script and told to read it if anyone asked too many questions. While moving through the apartments, I saw lives that had been paused. Plates on tables, radios low, dolls wearing tiny hats. In one room, a chess game sat mid-match. White bishop tilted as if it had changed its mind at the last second. In another, a fishbowl bubbled near the window. The fish turned slowly and watched us. At a nursery, a group of women were changing sheets and opening cupboards. A director in a blue dress asked if the children would go home early. We told her to wait for instructions. She said the little ones liked to nap with the windows open because the air was fresh this time of year. I told her to close them and to wash the children's hands. She asked why. I said because of dust. The word felt thin. By late afternoon, we began to hear the first rumors. A team that had gone closer to the reactor had lost 2 men to vomiting and confusion. A fireman's boots had stuck to a metal step that had gone soft. A soldier had coughed blood into his sleeve while saying he was fine. Rumors travel faster than trucks. You cannot stop them. If you try, they split and take side streets. We were told to keep our badges on our chests at all times. Little cards with silver film that would darken with dose. A man from the plant looked at my card and said it was already shading. He advised I switch with a fresh one and log the change. I did. I wondered what happened to the full ones. He said they went into a box. He did not say what happened after the box. The first real sign that we were losing came at dusk when a column of buses entered the city. They were not for workers. They were for everyone. The order had come from above. The city would be evacuated the next day. They told us to prepare lists, to mark blocks, to set routes. They kept calling it a temporary measure. They said it would be 3 days. Bring warm clothes and food for that time. Lock the apartments. Turn off the lights. Do not bring pets. It is strange what a single sentence can do. That last one, about the pets, cracked something inside the people who heard it. A few of them argued. A few of them smiled and said they understood. Most of them looked down at the ground and kept folding shirts. Night fell again. The smoke in the air turned the moon into a smear. We set up lights and worked under a weak glow that made everyone look like they were carved out of chalk. A small team of us was assigned to guard a warehouse near the train tracks that held meters and chemical suits. Half the suits were the wrong size. Some had small tears at the seams where the thread had frayed. We stacked them anyway. 2 engineers came in and took 3 meters. They signed their names in a book with slow, careful letters. One of them asked me if I could smell burnt concrete. I said I did. He nodded like that confirmed his worst thought. Near midnight, we heard a sound like a sigh coming from the direction of the reactor. It was long and soft, but carried. All of us turned to look. The glow pulsed and then steadied. I felt a pressure behind my eyes as if I had stayed underwater too long. For a moment, I saw movement again in the smoke, like people walking in a line where no floor existed. They were not frantic. They walked with the slow rhythm of shift change. Then they were gone, and I told myself it was wind. I told myself many things that night. The next morning, we began to move the city. Buses lined up like teeth. Men with armbands shouted street names and apartment numbers. We went door to door and spoke the script. People asked if they could bring photographs. Yes. People asked about winter coats. Yes. People asked if they should turn off the gas. Yes. A girl about 6 asked if the Ferris wheel would still open on May Day. I said yes before I could stop myself. She smiled and held a small bear close to her chest. The bear had one eye. As the buses filled, the streets emptied and the city began to echo. It is not easy to describe that sound. Footsteps in stairwells with no conversations. A chair scraping a floor with no meal to follow. A baby starting to cry and stopping before the second breath. When the last bus left a block, we chalked a mark on the gate. A few old men stayed behind on porches and smoked. They said they had lived through worse. They said this was only smoke. They waved us away like we were selling cheap knives. In the power plant yard, the helicopters kept coming. Some hovered so low I could see the pilot's jaw. A crewman leaned out and pushed a bag with his boot. He wore thick gloves. His hands moved like he was underwater. The bags fell and burst and a gray cloud spread. For a moment, it felt like a snow that burned instead of cooled. By evening, the city was a shell with a heartbeat you could barely hear. Our squad was told we would go forward on a special assignment after midnight. The words were delivered flat, without drama. We were to enter a maintenance tunnel that ran under the plant and check for water buildup, then report on a route for a cable line. The sergeant read our names. He did not look up. I put my hand on the notebook in my pocket. It felt heavier than papers should. While we waited for the signal, I sat on the steps outside the warehouse and took off my cap to rub the line it had worn into my forehead. The air had a dry bite, and I shivered, though I could not tell if it was from the night or from inside. A dog trotted out from between two vehicles and stared at me. It wore a red collar with a brass tag. It sat, then stood, then sat again, as if waiting for a word that would let it climb into a car. I spoke softly so I would not scare it. It tilted its head the way dogs do when they try to understand human sounds. Then it looked past me toward the plant and its ears pressed flat. I told myself what any soldier tells himself before he walks into a place that feels wrong. I told myself we had trained. I told myself we had orders. I told myself the ground might burn your boots, but it still held your weight. I counted my breaths and checked my rifle and checked my watch, even though time had stopped being honest. When the radio clicked and the sergeant said to move, we stood as one, 5 shadows against the pale yard, and headed for the mouth of the tunnel that waited like a black throat under the broken heart of the plant. And that is where the real climb began. The tunnel swallowed us as soon as we stepped inside. Our boots scraped on damp concrete. The air was thick, warmer than outside, and smelled of wet stone and burnt oil. The beam of my flashlight cut through dust that hung heavy, showing pipes overhead and walls stained dark with moisture. Every drop of water that hit the floor echoed like it was inside my head. We were 5 soldiers and 1 plant engineer who knew the layout. He carried a folded map in a plastic sleeve and kept glancing at it like it might change while we walked. He moved quick, as if speed would keep the weight of the place off his back. We followed close. None of us wanted to be the last in line. The deeper we went, the stronger the hum became. At first it was low, like distant machinery. Then it grew sharper, a high vibration that pressed against our ears and teeth. I checked my dosimeter. The needle jerked, then stalled at the far end, useless. I slid it back in my pouch. It was better not to look. The engineer led us down a side passage and stopped at a heavy door with a cracked seal. He muttered that water might have leaked in from the firefighting efforts. He told us if the water reached certain valves, it could trigger another explosion. His voice was steady, but his eyes twitched. We pushed the door open together. A wave of air rushed out, damp and sour. Inside, the floor shone with shallow water that stretched into the dark. We stepped in. The water soaked through the fabric of our boots in seconds. It was cold, colder than it should have been under all that concrete. Ripples spread from every step, carrying our reflections in broken pieces. The walls dripped, and now and then a clang rang out as a drop struck metal. My skin tingled. I could feel the radiation, even if I could not see it. It was like 1,000 ants crawling just beneath the flesh. Halfway down the passage, one of my comrades froze. He held up his hand and whispered for us to stop. Ahead, beyond the cone of his light, something moved. It was not a man, not a machine. A shadow passed across the water surface, tall and bent. For a second, it looked like it was standing just out of reach, watching. Then the beam shifted, and it was gone. The engineer hissed at us to keep moving. He said the brain played tricks in places like this. He said the shadows were ours. None of us answered. We moved faster, but I noticed how often each man glanced over his shoulder. We reached a junction where pipes met the ceiling like tangled roots. The engineer crouched, unrolled his map, and pointed to a valve near the far wall. We had to check if water was rising toward it. Two of us waited over while the rest covered. I watched the beam of their flashlights slide across rust and dripping metal. Then one of them slipped. His rifle struck the water with a splash. He cursed and stood, but when he did, I saw his skin glow faintly where the water touched it. Not bright, not enough to light the room, but a soft shimmer like the afterglow of a camera flash. We dragged him back. He shook his head, insisting he was fine. His voice was firm, but his hand trembled on the stock of his weapon. I looked down. The glow had already faded, leaving only watermarks. None of us spoke of it again, but every man saw. The engineer marked the valve as safe for now. The water had not climbed that high. We turned back, following the same path. The hum climbed higher until it rattled my teeth, and beneath it I swore I heard the plant exhale. It came from the walls, deep and slow, as if the plant itself had lungs. The others heard it too. I could see it in the way their shoulders tightened. When we reached the door, the sergeant ordered us to check another corridor. We obeyed, though our legs ached and our mouths were dry. This passage was narrower, lined with cables that pulsed faintly in the light. As we moved, I thought I heard voices ahead, muffled, like men speaking through water. At first, I thought it was the engineer, but his lips were shut, pressed into a thin line. The voices grew louder, then faded. I caught fragments, Russian words, orders maybe, or warnings. One of my squad mates whispered that it sounded like a roll call. We quickened the pace. At the end of the corridor stood a stairwell leading up. The engineer told us it connected to the turbine hall. We climbed slowly. Each step groaned. Halfway up, the man in front stopped and leaned over the railing. His light shone across the landing above. I saw a figure standing there. It wore a helmet, the kind the fire crews had. Its suit was scorched black, and where the visor should have been, there was only a hollow glow. It did not move. We raised our rifles, waiting for it to step or speak. Nothing. The sergeant told us to hold fire. He took one step up, shining his light again. The landing was empty, only dust and stains. The figure was gone. No one laughed it off. No one said it was shadows. We just kept climbing. The turbine hall was a graveyard. Machines twisted by the blast loomed in the half-dark. Glass crunched underfoot. Pools of water reflected the ruined ceiling, where daylight bled through cracks. The silence was broken only by dripping pipes and the occasional moan of metal shifting in the heat. As we crossed, I felt something under my boot. I bent down and picked it up. It was a child's shoe, charred and stiff. No child had been in this hall. That much I knew. I dropped it back and tightened my grip on the rifle. The engineer found another valve and checked it. He said we were done. His voice shook now, stripped of authority. We turned to leave, but a sudden crash echoed from the far side of the hall. Something heavy had fallen or been thrown. Dust rained down from the beams. We raised our rifles, searching the shadows. From the dark corner came a sound that did not belong. Not metal, not water. It was a cough, dry, human, then another. We froze, listening. The cough turned into a wheeze, then a whisper, too soft to understand. The sergeant barked for whoever it was to step forward. Nothing answered. We waited, weapons ready. My heart hammered so hard I thought it would echo too. Then slowly the sound faded, swallowed by the hum of the plant. We held our line another full minute before moving again. On the way back to the surface, every shadow seemed thicker. Every drip of water made us twitch. By the time we saw the faint light of night outside, relief almost broke us. We stepped out into the open air, like men surfacing from the deep. But relief didn't last. The sergeant told us what the new orders were. We would return tomorrow with more men and push closer to the reactor's heart. Tonight had only been the beginning, and as we stood there catching our breath, I realized something that chilled me more than the smoke or the radiation. It wasn't just the plant that felt alive. It was the whole zone around it, and whatever had woken up inside was watching us already. The next morning, the zone felt different. Not quieter, not calmer, just different, like the land itself knew what we had seen in the tunnels and wanted to test us again. Smoke still curled from Reactor 4, but now it was darker, more solid, like a column that refused to leave. Helicopters kept circling overhead, dropping their loads into the open wound of the reactor. but nothing seemed to stop the strange glow at its core. We were called together in a briefing room that had once been used by plant engineers. Maps were spread on a long table. Half the walls were cracked, paint peeling, but the room was crowded with officers, soldiers, and a handful of men in white coats. The officer in charge told us we would push closer to the reactor building itself, through the turbine hall we had scouted the night before, and then deeper into service passages. They wanted cables laid to power pumps, fans, and monitoring systems. Our squad was to guide the way because we already knew the ground. The white-coated men kept their eyes low. Their hands shook when they pointed at sections of the map. They explained risks in clipped words: heat pockets, unstable walls, water still gathering in basements. Radiation numbers were mentioned, but they spoke as if the numbers meant nothing. Too high to measure, too high to matter. We nodded like good soldiers. Orders were orders. Still, I caught the glance between my sergeant and another officer. They both knew this was suicide work, only dressed up as duty. We geared up with fresh badges and masks. Some of us wrapped cloth around our necks. One man tied a picture of his family inside his jacket. None of us said out loud that it might be our last time stepping into the hall. Back inside the turbine building, the air was even hotter. Dust swirled with every step. The floor had fresh cracks that hadn't been there the night before. Pipes hissed and popped. The glow from the ruined reactor bled through the gaps in the walls, staining the room a dull, sick orange. We spread out in pairs, covering the engineers as they measured routes for cable. My partner was a young soldier with sharp eyes who never spoke much. He kept glancing upward at the ceiling as if waiting for it to fall. After a while, I realized he wasn't watching the ceiling at all. He was watching the shapes that flickered in the dust above us. At first, I told myself it was just dust twisting in the beam, but then it sharpened. Men in fire helmets walking across beams that no longer existed. One paused and looked down at us. His visor reflected light, but behind it, there was nothing. No face, just emptiness. I blinked hard, and when I opened my eyes, the beams were empty again. But the fear stuck. My partner whispered, "They don't leave, do they?" I didn't answer. The engineers shouted that the cable route was ready. They needed us to escort them into the service corridors to connect the line. We followed. The corridors stank of scorched rubber and mold. The walls sweated. The deeper we went, the louder the hum grew. And then something new joined it, a rhythm. A faint tapping, steady like boots on metal, but it didn't match our steps. We stopped. The tapping stopped too. We moved again. It started once more. The engineer muttered a prayer under his breath, the words quick and panicked. At a bend, we found the source, or thought we did. A set of old lockers lined the wall. Their doors rattled slightly as if struck from inside. One locker banged loud enough to make us all raise our rifles. The sergeant yanked it open. Nothing inside but a melted coat and a pair of boots fused to the floor. We carried on, but from that moment, every sound felt like it belonged to something hiding just out of view. The real complication came when we reached the lower junction, where the cables were meant to run. The floor was flooded deeper than the day before. Black water stretched wall to wall. In the middle of it, floating slowly, was a helmet, the same kind the firefighters wore. It drifted in lazy circles. The engineer said we couldn't turn back. The cables had to be laid. We tied ropes around our waists and stepped in. The water reached our thighs, then our waists. It was freezing, so cold it burned. My breath caught in my chest, but I pushed forward. Every movement sent ripples flashing across the walls. Halfway through, the young soldier ahead of me stopped. He lifted his hand, pointing down. Beneath the water, something pale moved. At first, I thought it was just his reflection. Then it rose closer to the surface. A face, white, swollen, eyes wide open. Lips peeled back like it was screaming, but no sound came. Before I could react, it sank again, vanishing into the dark. We pulled him forward, telling ourselves it was debris, nothing more. But I saw his eyes. He had seen it too. When we reached the far wall, the engineer climbed onto a dry ledge and started securing the cable. His hands shook so badly he dropped his pliers twice. The rest of us kept our rifles ready, though we knew bullets meant nothing down there. That was when the lights went out. One moment we had weak lamps strung along the corridor, the next total black. Not even our flashlights worked. They flickered once, then died as if the batteries had been drained. The only light came from the faint orange glow seeping through cracks above. It barely touched the water. And in that near dark, the voices returned. Not whispers this time. Louder. Men shouting orders, calling for hoses, for help, for exits. Some were screams, some were prayers. The sound filled the corridor until it felt like we were standing among them. Invisible men locked in their final moments. The sergeant shouted for us to hold position, but his voice was swallowed by the others. My chest tightened. My rifle shook in my hands. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The young soldier beside me whispered, "They're all still here." Then just as suddenly the lights snapped back on. Our flashlights flickered to life. The corridor was empty. The water was still. The engineer was crouched, clutching the cable with white knuckles, staring wide-eyed at nothing. We hauled him up and made for the exit. None of us spoke. None of us had to. When we finally emerged into the open air again, the sky had turned dark, clouds rolling low over Pripyat. The helicopters were still circling, but from here they looked like insects against the smoke. My uniform was soaked through, my skin burned where the water had touched it. That night, while the others tried to sleep on cots in a school gym, I wrote in my notebook. I didn't write about the helmet or the face under the water. I didn't write about the voices. I wrote only one line. We are not alone down there. The complication was clear. This wasn't just radiation. It wasn't just heat and fire. Something else had taken root in the ruins of Reactor 4. Something born in the moment of the blast, feeding on death and fear. And we were being sent back into its heart again and again. The next orders came before dawn. A larger push, closer to the reactor itself. More soldiers, more engineers, heavier equipment. The officers said it would stabilize the plant. But in my gut, I knew the truth. We weren't stabilizing anything. We were walking deeper into a place that no longer belonged to the living. The push began before sunrise. Trucks lined the road outside the plant, headlights stabbing through smoke that had not lifted in days. Engines growled, men coughed, officers barked orders. We stood in formation, rifles across our chests, waiting for our names. The air was damp and bitter. Every breath felt like chewing on metal shavings. Our squad was assigned to the front wave, escort the engineers, clear the path, hold the line until the work was done. I checked my badge, my rifle, and the notebook in my pocket. The badge would darken fast. The rifle would do nothing. The notebook, at least, would remember for me if I did not walk out. We marched through the turbine hall again, but this time it was worse. The roof sagged where beams had cracked and fire hoses lay stiff on the floor, soaked in water that shimmered faintly in our lamps. The hum had grown stronger, a deep vibration that rattled the ribs. I felt it through my boots, rising from the concrete like a pulse. At the far end of the hall, the broken mouth of Reactor 4 gaped open. What remained of the roof glowed faintly, the light shifting like heat haze. A scaffolding of twisted steel leaned across the wreckage, and every now and then, sparks shot upward without sound. We were ordered to move closer, to secure a path for the engineers to install their monitoring gear. The closer we came, the air pressed like lead on the chest, and the edges of my vision wavered like heat haze. Figures flickered in the glow again. Firemen, soldiers, men in lab coats, all walking through the rubble, all ignoring us. They moved like film reels, looping the same final minutes. One figure carried a hose that sprayed nothing. Another clutched his stomach as if he'd been wounded. They walked past beams, through walls, into fire. One of our men raised his rifle, swearing they were alive. The sergeant slapped it down. "Don't waste rounds," he said, but his voice shook. He had seen them too. The engineers worked fast, setting up their instruments near the shattered walls. They moved like men in a dream, every motion stiff and jerky. Their meters clicked wildly, then froze, as if the numbers were too high for the machines to process. Then came the first scream. It echoed from a service tunnel to our right, sharp, human, full of terror. We spun toward it, rifles raised. A second scream followed, then silence. The sergeant ordered 2 men to check it out. They ran into the tunnel, lights bobbing, boots splashing. A minute passed, 2. Then one man came back alone, pale and wide-eyed. "There was nothing," he said, gasping. "No one. Just water on the floor." He couldn't explain why his hands were shaking so badly. The engineers kept working, but their faces had gone gray. One dropped his tool and refused to pick it up. He whispered that something was watching him. We looked around, rifles ready, but the hall was empty except for shadows. And then, all at once, the hum stopped. The silence was worse. It pressed against the ears, made every breath sound too loud. We froze, waiting. Then the ground shuddered beneath us, a deep tremor that knocked dust from the ceiling. The reactor glow pulsed, brighter, darker, brighter again. It looked alive, like a giant heart beating beneath the concrete. Shapes began to crawl out of it, no longer faint shadows, but solid. Figures of ash and smoke, human in outline but hollow where their faces should be. They staggered toward us, arms reaching, mouths open in silent screams. We opened fire. Bullets tore through them, sparks flying, but the shapes kept coming. They flickered with each hit, splitting into more shadows. The engineers dropped their gear and ran for cover. The sergeant shouted for us to hold the line, but even he was backing up, firing short bursts into the smoke. One of the shapes reached the young soldier beside me. Its hand brushed his arm, and he screamed as blisters rose instantly on his skin. He tore free, stumbling, but his sleeve smoked where it had touched him. I grabbed him and dragged him back, my rifle useless. The hall filled with chaos, gunfire, shouts, the crash of steel as beams gave way. Shapes moved between us, impossible to track. Some whispered in voices we knew, names of comrades, cries for help. Others hissed words we could not understand, broken syllables that clawed at the mind. We fell back toward the entrance, dragging the engineers with us, but the shapes followed. One loomed larger than the rest, towering near the broken reactor wall. Its body glowed faintly, ribs like hot metal, a skull of light. It raised its arm and the air itself seemed to ripple. The sergeant bellowed for grenades. 3 of us hurled them at once. The blast shook the hall, dust and flame filling the air. When the smoke cleared, the giant shape was gone, but the glow from the reactor pulsed harder, as if it had absorbed the blast. We ran. There was no order left, only survival. Men tripped, scrambled, fired blindly. Shapes lunged from corners, their silent screams echoing louder than any sound. I saw one engineer vanish into the floor as if the ground had swallowed him whole. Another soldier staggered, vomiting blood, then collapsed without a mark on him. By the time we reached the turbine hall entrance, half of us were gone. The survivors stumbled into the open night air, coughing, eyes wide, uniforms torn. The helicopters still circled, pilots oblivious to what was happening inside. To them, it was just smoke and fire. To us, it was a battlefield filled with enemies no bullet could stop. We regrouped in the yard, panting, counting heads. The sergeant was alive, though his face was pale and his hands shook as he lit a cigarette. He said nothing. None of us did. What words could explain what we had just faced? Then from deep inside the reactor came a sound that froze us in place. It wasn't a scream, not a hum. It was a voice, clear, human, amplified by walls of steel and concrete. It called out in Russian, firm and steady, "All units, hold your posts. Contain the fire. Do not abandon your duty." It was the exact order given to the first fire crews on the night of the explosion. Men who were long dead. We stared at each other, rifles trembling in our hands. The voice repeated, louder, echoing across the yard. Then another voice joined it, then another, until it sounded like a full command post, shouting orders, giving reports, coordinating men who no longer existed. The young soldier beside me whispered, "It's the dead. They're still fighting." And as he said it, I knew he was right. The zone wasn't empty. It was full, crowded with those trapped in their final moments, replaying them over and over, never able to leave. The reactor wasn't just leaking radiation. It was bleeding something else into the world, something that held the dead in its grip and refused to let go. The sergeant finally spoke. "We're leaving," he said. His voice was rough, broken. "Now." We pulled back, step by step, rifles raised toward shadows that no longer needed hiding. The voices followed us until the turbine hall doors slammed shut behind. Only then did they fade. That night we were ordered to write reports. We wrote about heat, about radiation, about unstable walls. We didn't write about the figures, the voices, the giant shape in the hall. None of it would be believed. None of it would be allowed on paper. But in my notebook, I wrote everything. Every shadow, every scream, every impossible moment. Because deep down, I knew this was not over. What we had faced inside Reactor 4 was not contained by walls of steel or bags of sand. It had already spread, carried on the wind, whispered in the voices of the dead. And I knew the next time we went back inside, fewer of us would return. The morning after the push felt like waking from a nightmare, only to find it hadn't ended. Our squad lay scattered across cots in a gymnasium taken over as a barracks. Some men groaned in their sleep. Others stared at the ceiling with eyes that refused to close. Bandages wrapped arms, necks, faces. By the time we left the zone, the young soldier no longer spoke at all. His eyes stared past us, as if already walking with the ones we left behind. He blinked slowly when I checked on him, but his eyes looked past me, fixed on something only he could see. Orders came down that our squad was to rest, but rest was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the voices again, calling orders through smoke, replaying the night of the explosion over and over. I saw the ash figures reach for us, their mouths open in soundless screams. The faces of my missing comrades swam up too. Men who'd been beside me hours earlier, now gone as if they'd never existed. Outside, the evacuation of Pripyat was complete. Buses lined the roads, carrying away families with only the clothes on their backs and whatever they could stuff in a single bag. From the gymnasium windows, I saw people pressing faces to glass, watching the plant as it shrank in the distance. They had been told they would return in 3 days. None of us believed that. When our squad was called for debrief, we sat in rows before an officer from Moscow. His uniform was clean, his face cold. He asked questions about the mission. Did we secure the hall? Were the cables laid? Were the engineers alive? We answered carefully. We mentioned the tremor, the extreme heat, the confusion of the layout. We didn't mention the shapes or the voices or the way bullets passed through figures that should not exist. If we had, we'd be branded as liars or worse. The officer wrote notes, nodded once, and dismissed us. To him, it was just another operation in a long list. To us, it was the line between the world we had known and the one that now pressed against our eyes and ears every moment. That night, 2 of our men went missing. They weren't deserters. Their rifles and gear were left behind. One of them had been sleeping on a cot beside me. When I woke to drink water, he was gone. His boots still sat neatly under the bed. No one spoke of it out loud, but the fear thickened. It felt like the zone itself was reaching in and pulling men away. By dawn, the orders shifted again. We were told we would rotate out, be replaced by fresh troops. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt dread. Leaving meant surviving, yes, but it also meant carrying what we had seen with us forever. The men who replaced us would walk into the same shadows, hear the same voices, and maybe vanish like ours had, and there was nothing we could do to stop it. Before we left, we were marched once more to the edge of the plant. We stood in a line and watched as new crews in heavy suits went in. From where we stood, Reactor 4 still glowed faintly, smoke spilling like blood from a wound that never healed. Helicopters kept circling, dumping more bags of sand, lead, boron. Officers shouted that the reactor would soon be contained, that the sarcophagus would seal it forever. The words sounded hollow. I remembered the giant shadow in the hall, its ribcage glowing, its skull of light. No concrete dome could hold that. When our truck finally rumbled out of the zone, silence filled the cabin. No jokes, no stories, no cigarettes passed around. Just the sound of wheels crunching over roads dusted with fallout. I looked back once through the rear flap. The Ferris wheel stood tall above the empty city, yellow against the gray sky. It would never turn. They brought us to a camp miles away where doctors checked us one by one. They drew blood, measured burns, pressed cold stethoscopes to chests. Some men collapsed during the exams, vomiting until their bodies shook. The doctors wrote notes and told us we'd recover. They lied with steady voices. When it was my turn, they scanned my badge. The little silver film already darkened. Too dark. The doctor frowned, then forced a smile and told me it wasn't so bad. He gave me pills, told me to drink plenty of water, and waved me on. I caught his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking. They were heavy with pity. Weeks passed in a haze. We were split up, sent to different units or to hospitals. I lost track of half the squad. Some were too sick to write. Some simply disappeared into facilities we were told not to ask about. I kept my notebook close, filling page after page with what I remembered. Not the official version, not the lies told at briefings. The truth, raw and shaking. When the news finally broke to the world, it was half-truths wrapped in careful words. An accident, a fire, a reactor failure. Numbers of the dead kept shifting, always lower than what we had seen with our own eyes. They showed pictures of evacuated families smiling on buses, said they would return soon. No mention of shadows in the smoke. No mention of voices calling orders from men long dead. That part of the story belonged to us alone. I tried to go back to normal duty, but normal didn't exist anymore. Every field exercise, every night patrol, I saw the zone again in the corner of my eye. A figure standing where no one should be. A whisper too soft to be win. The war had changed. It wasn't against NATO or insurgents or any human enemy. It was against the silence of Pripyat, the glow of Reactor 4, the ghosts that walked the ruined halls. One evening, months later, I sat alone outside the barracks. The sun was setting, the sky painted red. A stray dog padded close and sat by my boots. For a moment, I thought it was the same dog I had seen outside the warehouse that night, ears flat, staring at the plant. Its eyes locked on mine, and I swear I felt recognition. Then it trotted off, leaving me with the memory. Resolution came in fragments. Men built the sarcophagus, sealed the reactor under layers of concrete and steel. Officials said it was safe now, that life could move on. But for those of us who had walked inside, there was no moving on. The shadows stayed with us. The zone had marked us. When I close my eyes, I still hear the command post voices echoing, calling men to duty, telling them to hold their posts. I still see the glowing skull in the hall, raising its arm like a commander of the dead. And I know that beneath the dome, the heart of Reactor 4 still beats, pulsing with more than just radiation. We left the zone, but the zone never left us. Years have passed since those nights in the zone, but time does not erase what we saw. It only hides it under layers of routine until a sound or a smell tears the layers away. Sometimes it's the hiss of steam from a pipe, sometimes the sight of smoke drifting low across a field. In that moment, I'm back there, standing under the broken roof of Reactor 4, hearing voices that should not exist. The world knows Chernobyl as an accident, a failure of machines and men. They see the photographs of an abandoned city, the Ferris wheel, the empty schools, the overgrown streets. They talk about radiation, numbers, contamination zones. They do not talk about what it felt like to walk those halls, to hear the dead calling orders, to see figures of ash reaching out with burning hands. That part belongs to us, the soldiers who went in and carried it out in our eyes and skin. Some of my comrades never made it back. Some died quickly. Their bodies burned from the inside. Others lived long enough to see their families again, but the sickness followed them, slow and cruel. A few of us, the ones still breathing, carry scars you cannot see. We sit quiet at reunions, and when the talk turns to Chernobyl, we share glances, but no words. We know better than to speak it out loud. People ask me sometimes what the worst part was. The fire? The radiation? The orders that made no sense? I tell them the truth. The worst part was knowing that place was no longer ours. The zone didn't belong to the living. It belonged to the ones trapped inside, replaying their last moments forever. And when we stepped into their world, they noticed us. The government sealed the area, built fences, guards, warning signs. They poured concrete and steel over the reactor, built the giant dome that stands there now. They tell the world it is safe, contained. But I know the truth. Concrete can hold back rubble. It cannot hold back voices. It cannot bury shadows. I've dreamed of Pripyat often. In the dreams, the city is alive again. Children running to school, workers biking to the plant, families shopping in the market. The sun is bright, the sky is blue, but then the light fades, and the shadows stretched long. The people stopped moving. They turned their heads toward me, their faces empty, and I wake drenched in sweat. Sometimes I wonder if we were meant to see it, if stepping into the heart of that disaster opened a door we were not supposed to touch. Men make mistakes, machines fail. But what we saw went beyond that. It was as if the moment of the blast carved a scar in time itself, a wound that never closed, and we were the ones ordered to stand at its edge, staring in. I still keep my notebook. Its pages are worn, the ink faded, but every line is there. The ash figures, the glowing skull, the voices of the command post echoing through empty halls. I don't know if anyone will ever read it, or if anyone would believe it if they did. But it matters to me that it's written, that the truth exists somewhere outside my head. If you ask me now what Chernobyl is, I will tell you. It is not just a reactor, not just a city frozen in time. It is a battlefield, not the kind marked by trenches or tanks, but one where the enemy is unseen, untouchable, relentless. A battlefield created by one mistake, one night, and a silence that still hasn't ended. And sometimes when the wind is right, I swear I can hear it again. The echo of voices calling orders into the smoke, the march of boots across broken floors. Not memories, not dreams, just reminders that the zone is still there, alive in its own way, waiting for anyone foolish enough to step inside. That is my story. That is what we carried out of the exclusion zone. Not just burns, not just sickness, but the knowledge that some wars never end. They linger in the air, in the ground, in the shadows, and Chernobyl is one of them. You're still watching without subscribing? Make sure you don't miss the next story. Subscribe now and share with your friends. Tell us your country, the time you're watching, and any real-life incident like this, then post it in the comments.